There are a lot of different ways that we can waste a lot of money because we don't know what path is best for us.
Gloria Steinem once said, "We will never solve the feminization of power until we solve the masculinity of wealth." Barbara Provost and Maggie Nielsen are the team at Purse Strings that will help you navigate the ins and outs of financial independence so that you can be financially fearless. This is Women in Money, the shit we don't talk about.
Kelly, welcome to Women in Money, the shit we don't talk about. I'm so excited to dive into this conversation of all things kind of building a family, not just adoption, but we got surrogacy, we got all the different things. So before we dive in, can you share a little bit about who you are and the work that you do?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me today. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about my favorite topics, which are adoption, surrogacy, and finances. So I came into this space from the nonprofit sector, actually. I was working in the nonprofit sector for a long time. So my lens on life, if you would, be fundraising, grant writing, philanthropy, those kinds of things. My husband and I went to China to bring our daughter home. We adopted her in China in 2007, really dating myself now. And she was 9 months old. And that, if anyone who's ever been through the adoption experience knows, it's just a life-changing experience. And what struck me most was just how much this cost and what a huge financial barrier there is for not only adoptive families, but families who are choosing surrogacy, families who are choosing other non-traditional paths. So with that, I had a master's degree in business and decided to go ahead and kind of step out on my own and start to work with prospective adoptive families. And also, over the years, we evolved into helping families doing surrogacy, egg donor, foster care. So really those non-traditional paths of parenthood. And now more than ever, don't we have so many choices? So many choices. So it's confusing, isn't it? So one of the things that VESTA does is to provide guidance to employees and employers by managing their benefits and helping them to really understand how do they envision their future family? What are the things that are most important to them? Are they interested in a multicultural family? Do they want an infant? Are they open to an older child? We have found that the price points between surrogacy and adoption have really kind of come closer together. So it's not uncommon for a domestic adoption to be upwards of $70,000 or $75,000. So it can be very expensive. And so one of the things that we realize is that there are so many choices and there are a lot of false starts. So a lot of folks can jump into fertility treatments, for example, and end up unsuccessful and on the adoption path or surrogacy path. So there are a lot of different ways that we can waste a lot of money because we don't know what path is best for us. So what VESTA does is really to help set that up. We really help employees to set that up and understand what are the paths for us, what works for our family, what's realistic financially, and how do we make a plan that we can succeed in and bring our family together.
Wow, I love that. And there's a lot of moving parts. Like you said, we're seeing a lot more conversation about this non-traditional family building. So what kind of changes are you noticing? Are you seeing an increase in one way or the other? Or what are you kind of seeing in your practice?
Really not necessarily an increase. I think curiosity more than anything. People are just curious. We're starting to understand. We're starting to level the playing field, I think. This is no longer about I have infertility and I'm going to go do a surrogacy or I'm going to go do an adoption path because I can't have children biologically. That's not really the question anymore. Women are choosing to parent much later. Women are choosing to be single parents. Women are making a lot of different choices. We have different family definitions. So it's really across the board. And the more popular, of course, the more media and press and information that's out there, the more popular that these paths actually get. You'd be surprised how important surrogacy can be for a same-sex family, for a single family, for anyone. But I think starting from just infertility and going from there is really not the right question. The question is, what does my family look like? And what are the choices that are available to me?
It's just so interesting because I follow some different people on social media who share their surrogacy journey of being the surrogate. And so what it's like for them to carry the baby and those relationships. And it's interesting to me just because it was something that I don't think people have been exposed to as much anymore. Like, now it's the whole MO, right? They're being sponsored and they're doing all these different things and they're having these babies for these families, which is wonderful. But some of that, like you said, is this press and this social media that really gets it out there, that you could see sometimes people use this as an income source if their body is capable of doing that, and it supports the family a bit. And so it's so interesting just because without social media, this was just never talked about as much and you couldn't follow their journey and all these different things. So it is really interesting.
And let me just say about that, certainly social media is a normal part of our lives, but I want to tread carefully within the social media circles around these particular issues, because there can be good information and bad information. And because these journeys are so emotional, they're so charged, it's really easy for someone who's having a bad experience to vent on social media or send the wrong information. And it's across the board. It's in adoption, it's in foster care, it's surrogacy, it's across the board in terms of misinformation. So we have to be very, very careful about our sources. And you have to really have due diligence around what is the information that you're getting and how are you making an informed decision about your family.
Yeah, and that's true, about everything on social media, right? We always see what's the shiny best outcome of any situation that they're trying to promote. But yes, and when you're dealing with children, babies, other humans, you need to be very, very careful about those conversations and about those activities and things like that. But I'd love to dive into some of the costs. Not having ever gone through any of this, I'm curious what the costs are that you see for adoption compared to fertility treatments and even compared to surrogacy, something like that. Like, what kind of monies are we thinking about? Because you need to kind of pony up your own dollars for this.
Oh, yes, you do. And you need to be prepared to do that. And there are a lot of folks who are not prepared around that. One of the areas that I think gets missed a lot is a element of adoption called relationship or kinship adoption, where you might have a family that has had a tragedy in some way, and they're asked to adopt nieces, nephews, grandchildren. And in those kinds of situations, the finances are not in place. This is not something they're looking for. We work with unfortunately, several families who are from other countries, families from Ghana who have lost their brothers and sisters in Ghana and have to go and adopt. I'm currently working with a case right now of a family that has to adopt 2 little boys from Ghana, 2 nephews. And they've been in this process for over 2 years. And this is a $50,000 plus experience. So it's a hardship on that particular family, but they have to get these boys home. But let me back up and answer your question, Dr. Barb. So part of the challenge is that you may or may not know that California, the SB 279, I believe is the correct number for that bill. It just came out in July of last year and actually redefined what fertility is, what infertility is. There are a number of what is considered to be mandated states where fertility and infertility treatments have to be a part of the insurance plan for employers. So that creates a hardship, of course, on employers to create that. I can't give you the specifics, but a company that's in California that has 500 employees that perhaps don't have the capacity to offer that, but it's mandated. They have to do that. So there's that. There's the fertility piece of that. And as I said before, a lot of people just naturally go to that. And so if you're in a mandated state, there are some financial resources that are there, but there's still an out-of-pocket depending upon who your healthcare provider is. you're right, there is a financial responsibility. There's also a further responsibility if those treatments are not successful. And so if those treatments are not successful, now you have perhaps spent your out of pocket, you spent your savings, you spent your money, and now you're not successful, you don't have your family together, and now you have to start over. So we see this a lot. And not to say that fertility treatments are not important, but depending upon the provider, anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000 per round for IVF treatments. So that can be very expensive. And of course, I can't speak to the kind of healthcare network or what's the copay or anything around that. If you're lucky enough to be in a mandated state, then there is support for that. So you have that experience. Then you have domestic infant adoption, which, as I said, can go all the way up to $70,000. And it depends upon a lot of things. Are you being very specific about the child? Do you want the child to be healthy, no drug abuse, no alcohol abuse? What are your requirements in terms of birth mom? And what are you open to? So that's an issue. And how fast do you want to find a birth mom? So adoption is very different in that it is much more regulated than surrogacy. So there are regulations around birth moms and regulations around how much can be paid to a birth mom for birth mom expenses, reimbursing her for expenses. On the other side of adoption, there is an adoption tax credit. So the tax credit, which just became a refund and a tax credit. So anyone that's pursuing a domestic adoption, foster care, or intercountry adoption is eligible for a $5,000 refund plus a $12,000 tax credit. That's upon finalization of that adoption. Step-parent adoption is excluded from that. But there is no tax credit in surrogacy. No tax credits in surrogacy. Surrogacy is a largely unregulated field. There are best practices, there are ethics, there are organizations that are setting best practices for surrogacy, and the United States is actually one of the better countries, more regulated, I'm using that word loosely, more regulated in terms of criteria, best practices for various different agencies. But it's still the wild, wild west. It's still, agencies can set their fees. Basically, they're all doing pretty much what they want to do. So, and that's not a bad thing. One of the big differences, I think, between the adoption community and the surrogacy community, the adoption community is largely a nonprofit community. Most of the adoption agencies, while there are some that are for-profit, are nonprofit agencies. And I defy you to find an adoption agency that's making tons of money. This is not an industry that you're going to make a lot of money in. On the other hand, surrogacy is largely a for-profit entity. So those companies that are doing surrogacy and egg donor, the clinics, those kinds of things, those are for-profit entities. So understand that there's a difference in the philosophy, if you will, in the structure, in the fundamental understanding of the practices of the business. It doesn't make it good, bad, or indifferent. It just is. So surrogacy can range anywhere from, depending upon the part of the country that you're in, can range anywhere from $70,000, $80,000 all the way up to $150,000. And the biggest piece of that cost is going to be agency fees, gestational carrier compensation. If an egg donor is required, then an egg donor compensation, and then insurance for the surrogate. So the intended parents are carrying the weight of the financial requirements and financial responsibility. And the gestational carrier compensation can vary. So you could have an experienced gestational carrier in California that is getting $80,000, $90,000. Dr. Barb in Chicago, I've seen GCs get as much as $80,000. So there are lots of choices that can be made. That's why I think VESTA is doing, one of the reasons that we're in the space that we're in is because there are so many choices, right? And so when someone steps into a journey like this, being able to make some decisions along the way Do you want an experienced surrogate? Do you want a surrogate who's never done a journey before? Do you want to travel? Are you open to travel? If you live in California, maybe you're open to traveling to a state where where the compensation is not so high. So there are lots of levers to be pulled here, both on the adoption and on the surrogacy side, that can really have an impact at the end of the day. And I don't want to forget that there are many, many employers that are doing great things and offering benefits for their employees. And I will tell you that if you're an employer and you're not, or you work with a company and your company does not offer benefits, the best family building benefits, the best way to do this is through a grassroots effort. I can go back and show you employers who, through grassroots efforts, employees who have gone and advocated for these benefits, where they have created the benefit for that employees and those to pay it forward.
Wow, it is a lot.
It's a lot to unpack, for sure.
So your organization helps couples navigate all of these decision making.
Yes. And what VESTA for Families really does, where the differentiation comes with VESTA for Families in the whole family building benefits space, is we align the path with the financial wellness piece. So there is a journey that has to be navigated, right? But unless you're paying attention to the financial wellness of the family as they're going through the process, it doesn't matter how much money you're throwing at this. If you don't have the guidance and the financial wellness integrated, a family could potentially lose a lot of money. One example that I'd like to give, one large major company, $75,000 for an adoption. That's a lot of money for an adoption, right? You could do a full adoption with that, or you could do multiple adoptions. This particular family had no guidance. They had a generous employer benefit. However, they picked an agency, and the agency unfortunately went out of business. And so by that time, half of that money had been spent, and there was no recourse for that. They had to start over. So without the guidance, without the assistance of someone coming alongside and coaching and being an advocate and helping them to ask the right questions, it can be very, very difficult for the family.
So there are questions that you feel like people should ask right from the get-go, either to the company or to like kind of deciding which route that they want to take. Like, what are those top questions or considerations you always recommend thinking on or asking about?
The first thing is really about, how do you envision your future family? What is right for you? And there's no right or wrong. We don't get to be the police. This is just about a question that's right for you. Do you want your child to look like you? Are you open to a multicultural family? Are you open to an older child? What is it? I always love having this initial conversation with families, because it's really, really important for them to go there. Just go there. Allow yourself to go there and envision what that looks like. And you really have to back out of that vision to begin to ask some questions to understand. So if I'm talking to a family who wants an infant, and, that's just the bottom line. We want an infant. They're going to end up doing a domestic adoption path, or they're going to end up doing a surrogacy path. A lot of the questions around surrogacy are, can the woman carry? Are there some medical issues that prohibit her from carrying? There are a lot of factors that are included in that, but the difference between adoption and surrogacy can be very expensive, so that sometimes the cost is just a decision.
Is surrogacy, do they have to find their own surrogate, or do you do that, your company?
So VESTA for Families is not a placing agency. We're not a surrogacy agency. We're not an adoption agency. We are a benefits company. So we manage the benefits for the employer and work with the employees to guide them through their process. So we help an employer to create a policy according to best practices. We work with the employers to help them understand, should I give a reimbursement, or can I just provide an education and advocacy program like VESTA? So we work with the employer when they want to bring a benefit like this into their company. And then as we work with the employee, we're helping to guide them to providers through our curated network. We're helping to guide them through the financial aspects of it, budgeting, understanding what's involved, the timeline, all of those things. And so we come alongside the family as they're making all these decisions. We're an independent advocate for the family, for the parents, not for the agency, none of that. But to answer your question around surrogacy, so there are independent journeys. There are opportunities where a family member or a friend or family might be willing to be a gestational carrier, which is fine. There are people who do independent journeys. It certainly is something that is done. I'm not sure that I would say it's a best practice because there are so many different factors. There are legal factors. There is an escrow service. Is insurance. As I said, there's medical understanding, the surrogate going through psychological training or counseling, being ready for this. There are so many things that happen, so many steps that happen. I would think that someone who would want to do an independent journey, the way that I would describe it to you is you are remodeling your house and you decide that you want to be the general contractor. Well, people do that, right? Okay, go find your electrician. Go find that tile guy. Go find that person. Or you hire a general contractor to come in who has the resources, who knows the path, who knows what's going on. And it really is a choice, but I will say a best practice is utilizing an agency.
What are the timelines these days for a domestic adoption?
Depending upon all the criteria, as I said, typically a timeline for domestic adoption is going to be anywhere from 12 to 18 months. And it could be faster if they want to get to the head of the line. You pay for that, obviously. There's a lot of different ways that you can do a domestic infant adoption. You can network only in your own state. You can network nationally if your agency is licensed in other states. So you can use a consultant and you can sign up with multiple agencies and therefore, your name is on multiple lists if you want. Most domestic or folks who are pursuing infant domestic adoption create a profile and that profile then is marketed. Certainly the difference between adoption and surrogacy, very, very clear differences. So you have a birth mom who has a genetic connection to that infant, to that child. She has the right to terminate or not terminate her rights throughout the duration of that adoption. There's a certain point at which she would terminate her rights after the child is born. If she changes her mind, that's absolutely her right to do so. The gestational carrier in surrogacy is not connected in any way to the child. She's contractually, legally bound to carry that child and follow the aspects of the contract.
And then what is like the paternity, maternity leave for people who either do surrogacy or adoption? Do they get that same 6 weeks or whatever we're given these days?
No. It depends on the company. It is not recommended to divide or separate in your policy specific maternity leave. Lots of companies are going to maternity and paternity leave, which is obvious that that's important that they need to do that. But most benefits, most leave include adoption. Very few times when I have seen it excluded from a company leave. One of the things that I think is important is the Dave Thomas Foundation. Dave Thomas was a Wendy's, if you recognize the name. He was a champion in terms of foster care and adoption. The Dave Thomas Foundation has what is called the Adoption Friendly Network workplaces, and they acknowledge the top 100 and 500 companies that are offering benefits around adoption. So that means parental leave, that means reimbursement, and they get acknowledged for that. It's a wonderful list to be on if you're an employer, but it's also a good way to go and consult and find out what companies are actually offering these kinds of benefits. 70% of women will leave the workplace for a company that has these benefits. That's huge. It's huge. So employers really need to understand that while there's not a high utilization to this, it goes to brand, it goes to loyalty, it goes to productivity, it goes to all of that. And we see a lot of employers that are doing a lot of really generous benefits that include support and advocacy and also leave and reimbursement.
I love how there's a group that kind of has them highlighted and kind of going back to how you mentioned that if you're company doesn't offer anything, how do you offer the grassroots efforts there? Which makes so much sense because I can see some business owners being like, well, how much is it going to be utilized? We'll get there when it's needed. And that's not always the best way to go about things. Running a business, there's a lot of plates to spin. And so I can see why those grassroots efforts make a lot of impact, because it's like, oh, now that this is coming up, sure, we're happy to talk about it and offer it. But until someone needs it, we're going to do the 18 other things.
18 other things that we think are important. And certainly employers are being forced to look at high costs of healthcare. I mean, there's a lot of things that are on their plate. But I'm going to flip the script a little bit and say to you that this is one of the easiest things that an employer can do without really too much lift. This is kind of in the category of a no-brainer. An employer can do this very, very simply. They can do it budget neutral if they want to. There's a way that an employer can do an adoption assistance program that is really budget neutral. Bring in an organization like us, VESTA. We can advocate and provide education and advocacy. And that's a really good start. That's a really good way to start it without spending too much money, and it's not a big lift. One time I had someone talk to, in a conference that I was in, talk about utilization for these particular benefits. And of course, it's easy to have that kind of knee-jerk effect. Well, only one person, or we hear this a lot. No one in my company needs these.
That's a broad brush assumption.
Yeah, that's a really, really broad conversation. But what if one does? What if one does? Only one. What have you done? You've really, really helped a family, right? And that's going to go so far. It's going to go such a long way that even if one or two or three even experience this, it's just the right thing to do. It's something that you want to do.
And you're so right about that company loyalty after that. It's like they were so supportive. I want to stick with them. I mean, all the things. It's a huge reflection of the company, I believe.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And so for someone who's thinking about adoption or surrogacy, what's one smart financial step you would recommend them to take as soon as possible?
Well, so first of all, if their company does not offer a benefit, I think that's always a good first start, because one of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to get into it and then realize, oh, this is really expensive. Wow, I bet my company would do this. So even if it's something that's on your radar down the road, it's a good thing to do that. If folks want to, a little plug for ourselves, if folks want to reach out to VESTAforfamilies.com, there's a form on our website that you can fill out that we will actually reach out to your company on your behalf, or just reach out to them and help to advocate for that benefit. So that's probably the first thing. The second thing is that, to your point, Dr. Barb, you do have to have some skin in the game. So for adoption, for example, you do need to be able to at least have your home study done before you're eligible for grants, before you're eligible for loans, before you're eligible for any of this. That's a good place to start. Home studies are anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000. So you do need to have a little bit of funding here. You need to have your house in order. Like, you need to have an emergency fund that's set up, right? Don't we know the meaning of an emergency fund after COVID, right? After the pandemic. So you need to have an emergency fund. You need to kind of have your house in order around that. You need to check with your employer, as I said. So kind of doing those preliminary steps that kind of let you know, okay, this is something that we could commit ourselves to. We're going to start putting some money, set aside some money for our family building plan, if you will. We're going to advocate at our companies to see if they can create a benefit, or perhaps you want to find a company. Perhaps you want to look for a company that has a benefit that, you might want to go to. That makes all the difference in the world, is to be able to have a company that's not only helping you financially, but it's also helping you psychologically. It's a big lift to do these journeys.
And I can see how a lot of that might have a long tail. So you do want to get started early. I mean, if it's finding a new job, that's a resume, that's applications, it's getting on board. I mean, or talking to your company. I mean, again, they have 1,000 things they're doing. So yes, you might be on the priority list, but it's not, we'll get it done tomorrow. So getting started with these conversations early makes a lot of sense. I mean, getting a job is not a quick thing typically.
No, not these days. It's not a quick thing either. And as I said, a lot of the benefits really come out of these grassroots efforts. So being able to show, well, here are other companies in our space, in our industry that are doing this.
I think we've touched on a lot of great information. Is there anything that you feel like you haven't shared that the community needs to know about any of these options?
Well, I think if I were to share anything, it would be that it's really important to understand your choices. And it's really important to know that there's no rule book for this. There's not a plan to follow. It's your plan. And getting financial clarity, getting clarity about the process and the steps and the timeline that's in front of you before you jump in, if you can, I think is a very, very important part of the journey. And don't be afraid of the money. Don't be afraid of the money, because there are resources that are out there. There are foundations giving money to families who are doing grants or who are doing adoption and also surrogacy. There are lenders out there. Fundraising is very possible. I've never seen communities come together like I've seen them with adoption and surrogacy. Let your community come together and just let them be a part of not just the money part of it, but just the community and the journey itself.
Takes a community to raise a kid, right? Or multiple of them. It takes all hands. Yeah. And so, Kelly, there is a question we like to ask all of our guests. And after your experience helping, your own family grow and all these other families grow, what does financial freedom mean to you?
I'm sure you realize that it is different for everyone. For me, it really is about choices. It really is about being able to, I'm privileged. I'm so privileged to get up and do this every day, right? So being able to create that financial freedom for myself has been very important to me. But also being able to have choices every day of how I conduct my day, the choices that I make, the clarity of those choices. I guess that's really, for me, what is the most important thing, is being able to have the freedom of choice.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your expertise and helping all these families become families, because I know it's a very exciting opportunity and there's so many ways to go about it. So we appreciate you being in this space and sharing your expertise. Yeah, and so until next time, be financially fearless. You've been listening to Women in Money, the shit we don't talk about. Now it's time to take what you've learned and make bold moves towards financial independence. Stay in the know by joining our newsletter for exclusive tools, resources, and updates that keep you financially fearless. Head to pursestrings.co and sign up today. Need a financial professional who gets it? Turn to Purse Strings' curated directory, your go-to resource for financial experts who know how to put you first. Love this episode? Leave us a review and help us empower even more women to own their financial power. Until next time, be financially fearless.